Statistics reveal that in India there are around 30 million persons with disabilities, of which 13 million people are employable, yet only 3.4 million have been employed in the organized and unorganized sectors, via government-led schemes or through self-employment. We will be discussing just that today with a panel of industry leaders and change makers who are working on the ground. Employment of people from the community is of utmost importance to drive disability inclusion, and today we are here to talk about 1 billion voices worldwide to ensure inclusivity in its true sense. Welcome to this panel, Implementing Inclusivity, our industry leaders hearing the billion voices, a conversation we are conducting in association with Accenture India. I would like to welcome Mr. Sanjay Dawar, Managing Director, Global Strategy and Consulting and Disability Inclusion Sponsor at Accenture India. Ira Singhal, IAS Officer and Special Secretary Education for Arunachal Pradesh. She is the first disabled person in the country to top the Civil Services exam in 2014. Mr. Venkatraman SV, Chairman, CII National Committee on Empowerment of PWDs and IBDN and Managing Director, ANZ. And Anjali Ravi Kumar, Chief Sustainability Officer at Zomato. Thank you so much for being here. So, in our previous discussion, we addressed the vast gap between employable and employed persons from the disabled community. We also spoke about how various factors contribute to that gap, including difficulties in finding people with necessary credentials, inability to provide accessible facilities, several myths and misconceptions around disability inclusion. To take that conversation forward, I would like to start by asking Mr. Venkatraman, how do you think companies can bridge that gap and proactively address these factors?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me in this panel. It's an absolute pleasure, very topical items that we are discussing today. I don't think the problem is, accessibility or availability of talent. The problem is how are companies geared up to accept those talent and bring them into the workforce. So one of the things that, we experimented with ANZ way back in 2010 was, hiring a bunch of people and getting them embedded in the teams. And then our first experiment started with a few people who had speech and hearing disability, and we got them in, and then within a year we realized that getting them in was relatively simpler, but making sure they're assimilated in the environment and given the right kind of opportunities was much harder. That's when we realized that it's just not about giving an opportunity and making the workplace accessible. It's a lot to do with the culture that you bring in the organization. And now the moment line managers start thinking, saying that I have hired this person and I have to make sure that I get the right level of productivity out of him or her, at the same time work hard to make sure they are accepted and treated as part of a regular team by everyone. That's what I mean by getting the cultural assimilation. I think there's a great importance in driving this with the right level of thinking from the top. You set the tone. Once you do that, and if everybody is thinking and talking disability, then and inclusion, it becomes really, really easy. For a bank like us, it's something that's driven right from the top, from our group headquarters in Melbourne. The board and the group executive committee promotes inclusion. We pride ourselves in being an inclusive organization, and we find that more than anything else, it's a mindset that needs change. And for corporates to get this diversity inclusion agenda into their companies, rather than anything about availability and accessibility. So accessibility solves a small issue. The cultural shift is what is most important.
Very well said. So don't just think about diversity, think about inclusion very, very holistically. I want to go to Mr. Sanjay now. Accenture as an organization has championed disability and diversity inclusion, be it accessible spaces, assistive technologies, or innovative practices. So can you tell us a bit about how Accenture has come towards what we want to call true inclusion?
No, thanks, Shali. So, I'm going to start with some context, I guess. First of all, I guess, what you'll see in the background behind my picture is also the fact that we believe that today there are about 1 billion people at least around the globe who have some disability. This is both apparent as well as non-apparent disabilities, and there are at least 70% of the total disabilities which are non-apparent. That means they're not visible, not locomotive, not hearing or sight impaired related disabilities. But in a recent research, what we also found is that close to about 80% of the disabilities are actually acquired during the lifetime of the individual, somewhere between 18 and 64 years. And therefore, you are now in a situation where you can't, it's not about us and them. Not only is it the right thing to do, but I think everybody needs to be interested in this. Then the question comes up, is there merit in doing this? I mean, what's the ROI? And so we did some research to answer that question, that there is actually an ROI. And over a 5-year period, you can actually increase your revenue income by 1.5 to 2.5 times, and also your profits by about 2x. So now there's no reason for companies not to do it. Of course, it's the right thing to do, but more importantly, there's also a return on that particular investment that you're making. So, the way we look at disability inclusion is really across 3 aspects or dimensions. I think even Venkataraman talked about it. It starts with bold leadership. Yeah, so you got to take a target which is bold. And so if 1 on 8 billion people are actually people with disabilities, then somewhere between 10 and 15% of your company needs to be representative of society as people with disabilities. And the only way you can do that is that if you start from the top. So you need to have your leaders become allies and champions for this cause. And more importantly, not just allies and champions, but also they have to be role models in your leadership to ensure that people can actually relate to people with disabilities. So, it starts with bold leadership. The next thing is about, making sure there's comprehensive action. And this is all about what you do. So you have to have the right policies, the right practices to make sure that, for example, you're bringing in people not just because they have a disability, but for the right role with the right skills. Once you bring them in, then you need to be able to accommodate their disabilities. And therefore, you need support mechanisms like a global accommodation support tool that we have, where people can log their requirements and then we make sure we provide them some support. Once they're in, you can also expose them to the various technologies available, to make it apparent to them what are the kind of things which will assist them in their day-to-day job, given their disability. And so we've created what we call accessibility centers around the globe. And one of them is in India, where people can try out these new technologies. Then that's not enough. You need medical insurance to ensure that people, at least with the non-apparent disabilities, start self-IDing themselves as people with disabilities. And so for that, you need to cover all the non-apparent disabilities like blood disorders, genetic conditions, learning disabilities, and etc. So, as you can see, there's a lot of action which is required to be able to make it a reality. And finally, you've got to create a empowering environment. So, you've got to have allies. In India, we have about 15,000 allies for the cause. Not only that, you've got to also partner with ecosystem companies like NGOs, for example, because you can't do everything yourself. And then you've got to have development programs for the people with disabilities so that, they can grow with you within the organization. So end-to-end bold leadership, comprehensive action, and also an empowering environment.
Very, very great inputs there, Mr. Sanjay. The fact that you said it makes absolute business sense is, like how you described the whole business behind the profit, the what you can, because that is something that corporates will automatically get tempted towards, right? And you touched upon the cultural mindset, which we also spoke about earlier. I want to go on to talk about this creating an inclusive workspace. Should it just be a requirement after you hire a disabled employee? Should you have an already accessible workspace that can openly accommodate disabled employees? So I want to ask this question to Ms. Anjali. What comes first? If we take an initiative to create accessible workspaces from the beginning, does it help attract and assure thousands of people out there that our workplace is accessible and hence we are welcoming to your needs?
Thank you so much, Shelley and team. So I'll speak from the perspective of a company that's very early in its overall journey and definitely very early in its journey on inclusion and diversity and inclusion. We've only really just begun understanding disability and understanding what we need to do to accommodate people with various kinds of disabilities. So what our learning has been is that and I'll speak for what came first. What came first is actually a value chain initiative. So, as many of you know, delivery partners are third party sort of entrepreneurs who onboard themselves onto the Zomato delivery app to undertake deliveries. So, they're not really employees and they choose to mostly do deliveries part time. Now, interestingly, the fact that this is a part time opportunity for earning makes it already a little more inclusive to people with constraints on working, who have faced constraints working the whole day. But I think never in any of our collective imagination did we imagine that we could have a fleet of close to 300 differently abled delivery partners who've traveled more than 2 lakh kilometers to deliver more than 1 lakh orders and earn more than 50 lakh rupees, right? We never imagined. And this didn't happen because we made the opportunity for delivery differently abled friendly from the start. In fact, I often complain that this was designed for only able-bodied men. And it's even hard for women to sometimes participate in deliveries because a lot of them take place at night, dinner time, deliveries, etc. But I think this happened, fortunately, speaking to a little bit of what Sanjay was saying, because technology sort of came to our rescue. Actually, a startup called NeoMotion, incubated by IIT Chennai, designed a wheelchair that could be turned into a roadworthy scooter. So effectively, a motorized wheelchair that could go up to 25 kilometers per hour and could therefore not only support locomotor disabled people in becoming more mobile, but also, they could participate in any kind of activity that required that kind of mobility on roads. They actually tried undertaking deliveries themselves, and then they approached us for a partnership. And I almost couldn't believe my eyes that already there were members undertaking deliveries on their invention. And I said we must do something together. And so we signed an agreement to onboard 300 delivery partners, and that sort of opened our eyes to the possibilities. A very expected requirement is that a lot of customers would have to come downstairs to collect orders, right? The good news is that literally I've been told that out of 1,000 deliveries, it's really only 2 customers that make a fuss to come downstairs. And that's amazing as a ratio. It goes to say that there's a lot of empathy in the world out there. So I think that, I would like to say that this sort of fleet of 300 is really changing minds and hearts. And their visibility, of course, on the roads has made a huge difference, in sort of in sort of establishing that differently able people are not only people who need to work from home. They can work in all kinds of jobs. And I think so that for me is a big win. And when you ask the question of what needs to come first, does infrastructure need to change, or do you just onboard? I am today leaning towards onboarding first and learning what is required, because I realize that we cannot fully anticipate what is required without actually having members of the community on board. But yes, I do think that this can only be done at a time when the numbers are a little small. When you're thinking of scaling up programs, like today we're thinking of onboarding 1,000 more differently able partners, you have to have some systems in place.
Yeah. I want to move on to Ira. The smallest initiatives towards disability inclusion creates a big impact across the community. And similar is the case when people from the community make it big in an ableist world. They become a representative of the whole community. Ira Singhal is one such representative of the community. So, Ira, from the time you studied in Delhi University to today after clearing IAS, where there are initiatives, what were the initiatives that supported you to pursue your career? And now that you are in a position of power and authority, are there any initiatives that you have taken to ensure that the community gets the support it needs?
Thank you for the question. And I would like to acknowledge what Ms. Kumar said. That makes so much more sense that you have to have people on board first, and then only can you know what policies are to be made. So I'm so glad you guys are doing that. So coming back to that, back when I was studying, to be honest, disability is a topic that has really risen up in our conscience in the last 5 to 8 years. Before that, during all my study, I never saw this as a thing or a theme that anybody talked about or cared about. We had the original RPWD Act, which was a 95, I believe, 1995 Act. But the only thing that was happening was there was reservation in educational institutions as well as in employment. But even that was not being implemented well. That is still not being implemented well. A lot of places have their own policies of how they're going to select candidates with disability, and that is sort of against the basis of the whole act and the whole system that has been built. So that still needs a lot of corrections. But let me come to the importance of why that reservation has kind of helped. The biggest inclusion happens in a primary classroom. So once you have kids of all types studying in the same classroom, as they grow older, they stop seeing each other as different. If you've studied with someone who looked like me, you would not then meet a person when you're grown up in your office environment and think, oh my God, that person is less than me, or that person cannot perform, or treat them as somebody with more of based on their disability rather than their abilities. So the whole point is that it has to be at the primary level. That's still not there, but at least when you have it at the secondary level, all of those kids who are different come into your classroom, and then when you go into the employment sector, you don't have to start from zero and start thinking about what these people can do, but you know what they can do because you've experienced it. Another thing is that if you notice, most of the jobs that we've currently been talking about have been low income jobs, right? We're not talking about jobs which are intellectual jobs, which are high paying jobs. And that's where reservation has helped, because you've got the foot in the door in those premium colleges, premium institutions, and hence an access to the companies which could be hiring for those roles, which are higher income and higher level intellectual roles. So that again is a big thing. And we must remember that for a child with disability, just going to school is such a tough process. So in my the place that I'm at currently in Arunachal, imagine that my regular kid has to walk 5 miles on a hilly terrain, both sides. Now, can you imagine a child with disability being able to do that? Just getting to the school, going to the classroom, and remember, our schools don't have elevators. Our textbooks are not in Braille. Our teachers, in fact, I'm so ashamed to say that even in our schools meant for hearing disabled kids, my teachers don't know sign language. And remember that we didn't teach sign language to anybody else in the world. So the only people who know sign language are the other hearing disabled people like you. So really that language is basically about you communicating with others like you and not really you communicating with the world, which is the whole point of a language, right? So we have already excluded people in multiple ways. I remember for me, my parents have literally sat outside school for months asking them to at least give me a chance. I would end up being one of the toppers of those schools later, and they would not want to, when I was leaving, they would not want me to leave. But when that first step of putting me in that classroom came, no school would ever agree. So, it's really tough to just get that child into that environment. And that's where And then from graduating to that, to really be equipped to compete with everybody else in those competitive exams and get into those colleges, that's where reservation has made a huge difference. On my part, I think the biggest thing that I've been focusing on is building those inclusive classrooms and getting my teachers and my school authorities to be more accepting of children with disabilities in the classroom. There's this mindset, that like Anjali ji was saying, right? That if you have those people, you will have to build systems. So everybody in our school infrastructure automatically thinks, oh my God, we will need to do so much for these kids when they come to the classroom. So let's not have them. And they think that, oh my God, we can't do it, despite the fact that majority of times, unless it's a severe mental disability, you really don't have to do much. You don't have to do much. The child will cope. And see, the whole point is for that child in the school environment, and I'm not talking about employment, I'm talking about the school environment, to learn to adjust to the regular environment as much as possible. Right? And we give them the tools that they need for that. And we start identifying those tools. You don't have to have an extremely accessible school infrastructure for that kid to survive in it. And that's the mindset that I'm focusing on changing. And secondly, on the employment issue, because, back when I started my journey in the corporate sector, which was in 2008, companies would never shortlist a person with disability back then. But today, I see that they are a lot more open, they're a lot more willing, and they're a lot more interested in making that adjustment.
This is a great segue for my next question, because I want to come to Mr. Venkatraman and ask him, what are some of the strategies or approaches that employers can implement to create an accessible and supportive work environment? And if you can share some of the strategies that you have deployed at ANZ.
Some very, very interesting perspectives from both Ira and Anjali, and of course Sanjay. So I don't think the issue is about just creating, so it's beyond this ramp mentality and accessibility. I think we need to get out of that, and I absolutely agree with both Anjali and Ira that you need to get the people in first, and then they will help us build a more accessible and settled workplace here. So the one of the things that worked for us was that experiment that we carried. We went in with a lot of nervousness and anxiety because we were starting out early, and so we said we will try with 10 people, and that experiment really helped. And what I want to tell you is we underestimate our own and our people's capability to accept and include. We sort of assume that there will be reluctance and resistance, but I want to tell you that the teams that got these people with hearing and speech impairment, the entire teams put up their hand to learn sign language. When we started doing town halls, we figured that, people came forward and realized that there is a group of people who need, this additional help maybe to understand what is being spoken. So people learned sign language, volunteered for action. So we must give a lot of credit to our people. One of the things that worked for us very well was creating this group of allies. And I think Sanjay spoke about it as well. Allies are really crucial, and allies also need to be recognized. Other than that, the specific bits that really help to make sure your inclusion agenda works is actually right from the top. You need to have dedicated support from the management, create strong governance and policies to enable progress. So once you have the people in, use them to identify what needs are to be fulfilled from the organizational point of view, and then build that in. I think more importantly, have listen to the community. So once you start working with a few partners, their own ideas and thoughts really help in building this. Create a very, very inclusive hiring plan. So sometimes, what is measured really works. Getting them in is the first bit. How do you ensure everyone gets the right opportunity to grow? One of the challenges we had a few years ago was people were coming in at the entry level, but their progress was working to be very hard because they themselves lacked confidence, and then the organization was also learning. So we created a program dedicated to actually empower those individuals, fill the gaps that they had in in their and build their development plans individually. So because the numbers are relatively small, you can actually do this at an individual level, and that uptick program that we created made a huge difference. And now people are starting to put up their hands for promotions and things like that. So building up that that kind of a culture where their work speaks for itself and you don't need anything else, and then hence the opportunities that are available to the others are available to everyone here is also very, very crucial. I think there was a discussion about accessible technology, important, very, very important. Making sure that we test out things, making sure that we are able to provide people the right level of technology for what that will help them build up their productivity substantially. And there was a very small anecdotal example. Earlier we used to provide wheelchairs, but they were manual wheelchairs. That created its own sort of issues. All we needed to do was create a pool of electric wheelchairs, and suddenly their whole ability to move around buildings, meeting others, interacting with the larger group really expanded. So for people with that kind of a requirement, just make sure that accessible technology is provided. And then I briefly mentioned this about recognition awareness is really important. So you need to have a cultural program that drives inclusivity into everybody's thinking and thought process. Similarly, bring partners together. All this, if you have the right partners working with you, becomes easy. Anjali spoke about NeoMotion, and I have seen that company. So that kind of a partnership really opens our eyes to stuff, to possibilities. So there are now a lot more resources that are available for companies which want to drive an inclusion agenda, and a lot of it that I spoke about, as long as the cultural sort of ethos in the organization talks about inclusion with the right level of partners and right level of tools, I think it's eminently doable.
Thank you so much for that. Mr. Sanjay Rawat, I would like to ask you the same question. What do you think are the strategies that are needed to implement and create a supportive work environment? And if you can share some of the strategies that have been put in place at Accenture.
Yeah, no, sure. Absolutely. I think, Mr. Venkataraman has articulated it beautifully. It requires various aspects that need to be looked at. What I'll probably try and do is, just sort of provide a framework and, the broad things that one needs to keep in mind when you're looking at an approach to including people with disabilities. So I call it the 5 A's, or the 5A model, you can call it. So the first is access. So I think the first thing that we need to do is we have to broaden access. And so I think it's important that companies have the equivalent, and this is something we call it a accessibility council. And we try and ensure that all elements of the physical infrastructure, the technological requirements, which have been talked about, so I won't get into it, plus also, most importantly, the attitudinal accessibility for our people becomes a reality. And let me talk a bit about the attitudinal, because physical and technological is easy. Attitude is the main thing. And so what kind of training do you have for all your people within the company? How are you training your allies to be more empathetic towards the people with disabilities? How do you change the culture, which is what we talked about earlier in the conversation? So the first thing is all about this broadening the access. I think the second is about then creating the awareness. So how do you raise the awareness within the company? And you do this through sensitization training. You do it, of course, for the leaders, because, like I said, the change starts at the top, but also for the hiring managers, and for the hiring managers to appreciate the challenges that the people with disabilities have. And then how do you actually ensure that you provide the right accommodations through those hiring managers? But also the support staff, because from the minute somebody with a disability, let's say with a locomotive disability, is coming into the building, your support staff need to be trained, your security, everybody needs to have a change in attitude to making the place more welcoming for our people with disabilities. So that's the second thing. How do you raise the awareness? The third aspect is then advocacy. So what you have to do is you really have to foster advocacy, and this is where the allies and the champions become very important. So you've got to have champions who are furthering the cause of people with disability, and so globally we have about 36,000 odd allies for the people with disabilities, but in India itself we have about 16,000. And how do you ensure that they are furthering the cause for the people of disabilities within the company? So also the employee resource groups, so how do you ensure that there are groups available where the conversation can happen with people with a similar disability about the challenges they're facing, and therefore they come with recommendations which then we can act upon in terms of implementation. So advocacy is the third thing. The fourth thing would be, just making sure you are taking action around all the first three. And so how do you do that? Yes, we as an organization have what we call a Disability Inclusion Council. It has representatives from all our businesses. And we make sure that, we keep reviewing progress of each of those businesses throughout the year. And for example, as the India sponsor for people with disabilities, I do a quarterly review with every business to see how they're performing as far as their overall agenda for disability inclusion is concerned. So you need that mechanism to act and review what is being done. And finally, it's about accountability. I guess, we learned very early in our gender diversity agenda that unless you've got metrics, nothing is going to change. And so if you want to get to 50-50, then you better have that as a metric on gender, because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere close to 50-50. And so we've done the same with people with disabilities. We've got comprehensive targets by business, by level. We ensure that we monitor that, like I said, in the reviews, and we make sure that we are actually doing whatever it takes to further the cause towards getting to our aspiration of being representative of society. So in summary, it's about access, awareness, advocacy, actions, and accountability. That's another way to look at it.
Great. Thank you so much for that response. I want to move to Anjali and ask her about, specifically if you can talk about the challenges that you might have faced at Zomato while trying to implement the disability inclusion agenda, and how did you fight through to make an accessible space?
Yeah, I'm going to speak again from the perspective of a young company. I'm also going to speak from the perspective of a smaller company, because we're significantly smaller than some of the amazing companies that are represented here. We're only 3,500 odd employees all across India. Of course, we have a very large ecosystem of delivery partners. That's about 3.5 lakh. Just speaking, I'm going to speak specifically from the employee sort of standpoint, and how do we, what are the challenges in implementing policies and making our workplace more inclusive. I think the first is, I think Sanjay talked about it, is fundamental awareness. I think that when you're a small company, growing quite fast and maybe leaning towards the younger end of the spectrum, which a lot of startups are, you are sort of, there is no time to think, and there is no time to necessarily educate yourself. Therefore, you need some of this to come in from the outside. Someone has to make you aware. And I think, fortunately, with public listing, today we have to understand what the Rights of Persons with Disability Act is. And therefore, that process itself has generated certain awareness. But this awareness needs to be widespread. Every person in the company needs to be aware, because I think that the awareness itself can highlight to you what the challenges are. And if you have to ask me what challenges in beginning the process of change after awareness has been sufficiently established, is the need for an ecosystem of suppliers to help you get through that change. I think navigating the ecosystem of internal and external sort of participants to make this change possible is possibly where a lot of companies are stuck after awareness has been established.
Thank you so much for that answer. I want to come back to Mr. Davar for my next question. In the previous panel discussion that I was part of, one of the sounding opinion was the transformative power that technology has had over making the lives of the members of community accessible. So you've spoken about a little bit earlier, but can you tell us a bit more about how you have employed technology to help level the playing field for people from the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like you said, I did speak a little bit about it, but, we have something that we call the global IT accessibility practice. And the whole idea here is, how do we leverage technology to contribute towards the culture of equality within the company? And not just for ourselves, but even for our clients. And so we've got a network of about 34 accessibility centers around the globe. But one of them, like I said, is in Bangalore. And the idea is that people with disabilities can come to the center, they can experience the various technologies which can assist them. For example, it could be software, it could be apps, it could be any technology, hardware technology like specialized keypads, mouses, headphones for people with different kinds of disabilities, and what they can actually leverage to make life easier for them at the workplace. And so once the employees get a feel of those aids and tools and assets which are available, it then becomes easy for them to log into our accommodation support tool, request for some reasonable accommodation which can help them going forward. So the whole idea is, how do you make it much easier for them to do their day-to-day job? But this is not just about working internally within Accenture. We also have a tie-up with a number of ecosystem partners. So, for example, through our technology labs, what we do is we tie up with multiple agencies. We've tied up with a company called Bleed Tech, which helped us come up with a tool which would help really people with hearing disabilities appreciate music, for example, or along with the Indian Association for Blindness, what we've done is developed a tool what we call Drishti, which helps somebody with sight-related disabilities have the environment described to them, leveraging AI and technology. Or for that matter, for some of our hearing impaired colleagues, really a voice to text and a text to voice sort of an application through our labs itself. So I think there's a significant role for technology going forward, and not just regular technology, but I think now with AI and Gen AI coming into the picture, I think as long as we use AI responsibly, so there is a lack of bias, it's explainable, it's not just within a black box, and we can protect the confidentiality of the people. I think AI is going to have a huge role when it comes to helping our people with disabilities. And just one example, we've partnered with Microsoft to really co-develop a job search portal, which helps really match the skills of the individual to the roles which are required, rather than, again, looking at the label of a person with a disability. So we as an organization, and I in particular, I am convinced that technology is going to be very, very crucial in this entire journey of disability inclusion going forward.
That's a very, very positive response. I want to go back to Ira and ask her that you are now posted as the Assistant Commissioner in Indian Revenue Service, but this journey hasn't been easy. You have had to fight hard to be where you are at now. What concerns us more is that there are nearly 3 crore disabled people in the country, and not everyone has access to resources to fight their cause. What would you say to that?
To be honest, that fight still exists. In most places, people with disabilities still have to have that extra effort put in just to get what they, just to get that basic opportunity. And that's the sad part and the sad reality of India today. And I took up the challenge because I knew that most others do not have the financial resources to do that. There has been change in policy. And to be honest, me getting into the IAS as rank one kind of woke a lot of people up. There were committees formed to relook at the policies and to relook at how hiring was being done in the government itself. And that's one point I do want to make to the corporates as well. That please look at the way you are hiring, because that itself changes the number of people with disability who will come in. Even if you join the service, you would not be getting roles simply because people are convinced that you are a person with disability and hence you are not abled. And that fight exists every year still because that mindset change has not happened. And unfortunately, in government, it's always going to be a little slower because we are that big an organization, so you can't really control every little bit, and you can't really fire people, and you can't really take action for these kind of things. So it's a lot slower. I think once the corporates decide we want to do this, they can kind of get that done a lot faster than when the government decides we want to do this. So that the thing that I had to kind of struggle through, I think that only changes once the societal mindset changes. And I think that's where what everybody else here on the panel has been doing will make a huge difference. Because when the families see that that child with disability is earning and is not a person that they have to cater to, but also a contributor and a producer, that's when the societal mindset changes, and that struggle has not ended, but I'm hoping that it'll be a much more accelerated end now than the journey has been till now.
Yeah. Thank you for such a great response. I think corporates change, and now I want to talk about collaborations, all threes. I want to come to Mr. Venkatraman. How do you think collaborations and, say, dynamic partnerships between industry leaders and organizations propel disability and diversity inclusion? Do you see any merit in that?
Like everything else in business life, if you work together, obviously you deliver a lot more. So there is no question about the efficacy of corporates coming together, partnerships coming together, government corporates sort of working together. There is no doubt in my mind that that's the way forward. And we've got some terrific examples that were quoted of strong partners for us, right from sensitization training for our people, working with accessibility advisors on how to make our workplace more accessible. We have used partners extensively. So there is absolutely no question. Collaboration is needed. Collaboration will work. And, having access to the right partners is going to be a game changer in this quest for an inclusive society, inclusive organization, inclusive country, and inclusive world.
I want to move on and talk about something that we haven't spoken about so far. Neurodiversity and mental health, two overlooked disabilities that we often tend to not discuss as much while we are talking about disability inclusion. I want to ask Mr. Davar, as an organization which is at the forefront of this change to bring about true inclusivity, how has Accenture ensured that no one is left behind?
Yeah, no, I think, like I was saying, I think that's a great question. I'd say we are still relatively new in this particular area, but we do have a chapter around neurodiversity within the company now. We've launched an employee resource group, not just for the neurodiverse people that we have, but also for the caregivers for the neurodiverse people. And I think that's very important because that's when you really start to understand the magnanimity of that particular issue. We've had to do a lot of training internally around neurodiversity. We have online modules where we are training our people about the challenges of neurodiverse individuals. Also immersive, virtual reality sort of experiences for our people to learn about what neurodiversity disability is all about. But I think along with this also comes a big challenge, which is mental wellness, at least for the caregivers of people with neurodiversity. And therefore, what we've really pushed hard is our mental wellness program, especially for the caregivers in terms of providing support to the caregivers of neurodiverse employees. And I think it's helping. It's still early days, but it's helping because the ability to talk to somebody and just vent out the issues and the challenges you're having goes a long way in this particular area. You also need the benefits and the associated policies to be in place. And I think, through our medical insurance program, we've been able to cover neurodiverse conditions, not just for our employees, but also for their dependents. I think that's the other thing. And at the end of the day, I think, it's about getting more and more people to also self-ID in this particular area. And, the very interesting story of our global lead for neurodiversity, who in one of the conversations was told by a colleague that you may want to go and get yourself tested because he just observed the behaviors of this individual. And true enough, when he got himself tested, he was diagnosed with a neurodiverse condition. And so he took it upon himself to become the global lead for this and just to create the awareness around this particular area. So net, I think still early days for us, but I think we are making good progress and we've got a significant ambition about what we want to do in this area going forward.
That's great answer. I want to close this panel now. It has been lovely hearing from each one of you, but I will take one round of final thoughts. I mean, I personally have learned a great deal, and I'm going to go and mull over and read on some of these things that you guys are already talking about, the cultural mindset, the attitude, collaboration, a lot of great things to take away from this panel. I want to just go around and ask each one of you your final thoughts on this topic of disability inclusion. And as the change makers, what would you like to say to close this? Anjali, if we can start with you.
I have a pretty actually conventional wish list in a sense, because I still believe a lot has to be done on just seeding awareness of what we have in place in India in terms of the rights and awareness of the different types of disability. And I think that, I'm glad that you brought up different, mental wellness as well as neurodiversity towards the end of this, because I do think that we're still sort of stuck in thinking about diversity as like 3 or 4 types. And that's not true. And I think the greater the awareness, the greater the empathy, and with empathy will also be an unlocking of a lot more opportunity. I think that with that understanding, one realizes that one doesn't have to wait to welcome different able people into one's offices. One can start and work with the group to identify what needs to change, and it can be a parallel process.
Thank you. Mr. Venkatraman, your final thoughts and maybe what do you have on your wish list?
So we are an Australian company, so I will quote some Australian data. As per the Diversity Council of Australia, inclusive workplaces are likely to be 10 times more effective, 9 times more likely to innovate, and 5 times more likely to give excellent customer service. So this is proven research data. So it really works. So my sincere advice and suggestions to all who are sort of watching this is make inclusion a very, very impactful agenda for your company. And there is help available. So, everyone has to learn and get support, and there is help available. There are agencies like the IBDN network, and there are others as well who can provide the right guidance for companies wanting to start out, or companies wanting to learn further. And this is a journey. Make a start, and it pays. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Dower. Your thoughts, please.
Now, first, I want to start by thanking Ira and Anjali and Mr. Venkatraman and yourself also, Shelley, for joining us in this conversation. I think I've learned a lot, especially around the practical aspects of putting some of these initiatives on the ground into reality. But two things, I think there was a mention of innovation, and I think we really have to be innovative about how we approach this topic. And I'm always reminded by one program that we run, which is called the Inclusive Internship. And here what we do is a 3 to 6 month internship program for people with disabilities to let the recruiting manager understand the individual and for the individual to understand the organization. And it's really paid huge dividends to us. And therefore, I keep pushing our teams also to be more innovative, because that's the way you can really make a difference here. And so any ideas that the others have, I'd love to hear it even offline in terms of, innovation that they are doing. But the one ask, and I think since Mr. Venkatraman is on the panel, I think just like for gender diversity, we've got board members who are women. I think it's time that we start propagating for board members who have disabilities on boards of companies. And to Ira's point, companies are where we need to see the change happen first. The government will make a change, but it takes time. I think we need to push the agenda along further by, propagating board members with disabilities.
Yeah, and you did talk about the top-down approach, so it
absolutely
totally makes sense. Yes, Ira, your final thoughts and anything that you have on your wish list.
I'm really happy to hear all the panelists here talk about, because once we give the financial empowerment to the sector, that's where the actual inclusion will happen. So hopefully that we can, as world, that people with disabilities get the opportunity for financial empowerment. And I'm just saying opportunity and not a compulsion that they must be, but just at least that access to opportunity and that access to being judged for their abilities and not their disabilities. So I think we've made good progress on that, and I would love to see this actually reach the end goal.
Thank you so much to each one of you, Ira, Anjali, Venkatraman, and Mr. Sanjay Dawar. It was really, really exciting to hear all your thoughts today. As we draw the curtains on our discussion, the pressing nature of our mission becomes evident. Our dialogue today echoes the aspirations of millions who seek not sympathy, but equal opportunity. The statistics highlight a stark reality, challenging us to turn awareness into action. Let's carry these insights forward, weaving inclusivity into the fabric of our workplaces and communities. Like we rightly discussed, collaborative effort is key, and let's together cultivate an environment where ability knows no boundaries. Our commitment to this cause extends beyond this conversation, driving us towards a future where every voice, regardless of ability, plays a part in the progress we make.